Hello, friends. Welcome to Worldbuild with us, the podcast where we create fantastical worlds with help from you, our listeners. My name is Rob Hilferty, and I'm here with Chancellor of Chubb, Chris Prunty, along with continued special guest, Daniel Quinn. Joining us today is media entrepreneur and designer of our Worldbuild with Us logo, Courtney Staples. Courtney, good to have you with us.
Thanks for having me on.
Yeah.
Chubby or like an erection?
On today's episode, we are talking dungeons, and what is essentially our first patch notes episode. We're going to go back to the previous deep dives that we've missed and add dungeons to each of them. In the future, when we do a deep dive episode, you should expect dungeons as another important aspect of what we go over because, I mean, come on, how can you not have a cool adventuring site inside of a nation? Isn't that like part of the reason you go there? You want to visit and stuff like that? Anyway. On today's episode, we're going to be going through the Caliphate of Feasts and Famine, the Empire of Embers, and the Bank of Death to add our own twists and turns onto dungeons from those regions. So the whole reason that we're doing this episode in the first place is way back when we were doing the Bank of Death, we kind of hit upon this idea to do, we kind of came upon this point of interest that was basically a dungeon. And from listener feedback, we heard that that's kind of a cool thing that we should do. And the reason that we have Courtney on today is she was pitching this idea surrounding the Caliphate of Feasts and Famine. And what came from that is basically why she's here today. So Courtney, why don't you go ahead and pitch us what would have been in that email you were going to send to us?
I've been reading and listening to a lot of stuff lately about like extinctions and ecological collapse and all that fun stuff. And I thought a dungeon related to pollution would be really cool, especially with the Caliphate having like these runoffs and sinkholes and things, kind of going into how that civilization impact affected like the natural areas and just like screwed it up in horrific ways, and maybe go into like why people might be interested in going there, even though it's like a disgusting cesspool.
Yeah, and for those of you who don't remember, the Caliphate of Feasts and Famine is the largest current empire in the world of 1,000 gods, and essentially believes that there are those who have and those who have not. They are deigned by the gods of fates and hunger. They are deigned to live in a caste system where there are people who have wealth and power and influence and those who aren't. However, the twist with that is that they both recognize each other as a necessary half to the system. And so with the Caliphate of Feast and Famine, there is an area, because they're the largest empire, they also show off their power. They essentially take god hearts and smash them when they are deemed to be too dangerous to be allowed to exist anymore. And thus there is this kind of runoff, as Courtney said, that leaks into the underground river and essentially creates incredibly powerful monsters from the twisted god essence that once existed amongst the god hearts. So what are we going to do with that? I mean, I like the idea of a dungeon that's built essentially around pollution. I mean, I think there's some kind of basis in reality, or at least in folklore, with something like the MacLeod, which are those weird, gross horse-looking things that come from pollution. You might be thinking of the Kelpie, which are the horses that drown people. That's something different. The MacLeod are like weird horse things that strictly, they're fae, but they're twisted, messed up fae who just really dislike pollution.
Is that German or Russian?
Probably. It sounds depressing enough to be.
No, it's true. That's good. That's good rule of thumb for that.
Yeah. Just remember that if everyone dies or they sell children for a potato, it's probably Russian folklore. Also, if Baba Yaga is involved, it's definitely Russian. So, yeah, gotta throw in Baba Yagas.
To answer the question of what we might do with the dungeon, I can imagine the export of the pollution being worthwhile. That is, a reason to go into the dungeon would be to take some of that runoff and use it as a drug on the surface.
Oh, okay.
Interesting.
I'm thinking, have you ever heard of, what's it called? I think it's called crocodile.
Oh, God.
Yes.
Speaking of Russian horrors, yeah.
Yes.
Crocodile is that like heroin knockoff that is like corrosive to your whole body.
Yes.
Interesting. So do we want to go with like a drug theme, or like how does that work exactly? Oh, wait a minute. So originally this idea kind of stemmed from, the heroes who went down to fight the monsters often ended up being mutated into monsters due to exposure to this thing.
Yes.
So why don't we go ahead and take that drug and turn it into something that is, because I don't want it to be a liquid. I think that might be a little bit too, because like, what's the side effect of that, right? Like, what is injecting that into you going to do except directly turning you into a monster? So what I'm thinking, that's actually not a bad idea. But what I'm thinking is maybe you can get a dried version of it, or maybe you can collect it and then dry it, and then the weird powder mixture that you can make from it gives you some kind of mutagenic high of some kind, right? Where you're literally snorting in the god dross of the god hearts. And so there's something, I actually kind of like the idea that because you're essentially directly injecting like magical energy into your person, and because there's a mixture of gods, each trip is going to be a little bit different. So it's not like you're going to get like the same high every time, and thus it's going to be a little bit weird every time you do it.
Cocaine / LSD.
I like the idea of cocaine and LSD. So almost like a methamphetamine, like where you're like super powered because it's actually just god essence. So you're like a demigod for a short period of time.
So I was actually reading a comic lately. I am blanking on what it's called. I think Bone Parish, maybe, but it's about a new drug that's developed from corpses, and like the user gets like memories essentially of the deceased person. And also thinking back to, I think it was Daniel Liu had that idea of like the devil's claw-esque plant that's like hallucinogenic and weird in this oasis type thing. Like what if that's part of this corruption?
Like its tap roots are deep into that.
Yeah,
That's cool.
And that's like
That's a
part
good
of why
idea.
it makes you like hallucinate and like have all these crazy visions.
That's actually a really good idea. Yeah.
Because it explains the plant too, and it's one of the things that grew outside the city because of the whole runoff. Yeah.
So now that we've got like the kind of main idea down, let's go ahead and suss out the dungeon a little bit more, right? All right, so let's kind of break this down into categories, right? So I'd say that the theme is going to be pollution or corruption of some kind. And then we've got the object of importance, which is what drives people to go and visit this dungeon, or what, the main function around the dungeon kind of functions as. And that's going to be the god cocaine / LSD. We need to come up with a better name than that, obviously. But the drug that comes from god essence is important, I think. I think that's going to be what, because one, it mutates you in its raw form, and two, it's a weird drug to take otherwise. And then what else would we need? Maybe let's talk about what the dungeon looks like, because I don't want it to be just like an underground sludge river, right? Let's give it a little bit more flavor than that. Let's give it a little bit more pizzazz, as it were. Yeah, and I just did jazz hands. Yeah. So what can we do to make this dungeon a little bit more interesting?
So I could see a little bit of it being the sludge river and everything, but I feel like when it started out, it would be taken care of in some sort of like nuclear waste situation where it would be built around something, where there's like they built this containment area, but either forgot about it, mishandled it, or just over time, god goo gets dangerous.
So bunker-esque.
Yeah.
That's kind of what my brain thought of as well, where it's like a crypt or a tomb, but it's like not the stuff that's like keeps the dead. It's like, hey, don't go for real, don't go in there though. Like that's not a good idea. But I feel like that's kind of typical, right? Like I like the idea of a bunker. I like the idea of, but I thought the idea that we had when we were running through the Caliphate first is that this was not necessarily something that the Caliphate knew about, right? So let's kind of take that idea and run with it. I don't want it to be worked. I want it to be a little bit more natural. So what can we do, or at least at its source, right? Because that's where it starts and then kind of leaks out. I mean, am I going crazy
Maybe
here?
there was a sect that knew about the consequences and they set up labs down there.
Okay, now we're talking.
Yeah.
Now I'm getting this idea that we can kind of get like, like there's this group of scientists or people of the Caliphate who are basically wearing hazmat suit level of stuff, and they're skimming the pool for, suitable sludge material. and they're constantly in fear of transforming themselves.
Yes.
And there's also this kind of threat of becoming transformed slightly. And so, like, you know that part of them are definitely half mutated at this point. And so now we're getting into straight up post-apocalypse, like Fallout level of, and this is, Courtney loves Fallout, which is, I'm sure this is loaded up right away.
I mean, if it was secret, then they'd have like high protocols to like make sure it was contained and taken care of until probably something went wrong, like Chris was alluding to, and they had to shut the whole thing off or shut access to it off.
Well, I like the idea that these people are not related to the caliphate at all. Like they're essentially like living outside of the government because they're like, we don't want them to know about this shit. We're going to live off the grid and we're going to become drug peddlers of this weird mutant drug that just so happens that we just so
They're
happen
like
to
a
find.
secret mercenary kind of cult.
Exactly. But it's not even a cult. They're just like a drug organization who just so happens to know about this weird runoff that happens.
Oh, I was just going to allude to the name Demi or Icker or something.
I like
I like demi sauce and also demigod and
Demi
Icker.
sauce.
Demi sauce.
Yeah,
That sounds like a barbecue sauce.
it is.
Okay, that's what I thought. Okay. I guarantee that's some good sauce there, boy.
I mean, it would be good to have like a slang name for it like that, like the sauce or like the Iker.
We're not calling a drug in our fucking nation the sauce. I refuse, good sir.
We may not, but the drug people might.
Yeah,
have.
it's weird how those addicts just started calling it the sauce.
It's not even a liquid. It's a dried
It
powder.
could have been like Icor, but they shortened the word to be like the
Ick?
ick. You know, like,
That's the dumbest shit I've ever heard.
Give me that
Daniel.
sticky
give me
icky.
some of that ick.
Daniel, that's the dumbest shit I've ever heard.
I was thinking more along the lines of like Eternum or Immortal or something, referencing the gods. But I mean, ick works too, I guess. Just,
Courtney, I know you're new here. You do not have to side with their terrible ideas.
Okay.
Do not. We have
powder.
standards here, at least on
aphid
this
milk.
side of the table.
And it makes the sauce.
That's where we get the aphids from.
Yeah.
I thought there weren't any aphids, or
Well, they're secret now.
are they
They
in this
mutated
cave?
them.
They're
Are they?
underground.
They mutated them.
Yeah.
Oh, and the milk is what you drink to get high.
Yes, she's on her side.
I am so excited to
I'm
cut
sorry.
all of this out. This is all getting cut. All of it. Okay, so now I'm kind of digging this. So I'm kind of viewing it as layers, right? Where it's the front layer, which is where the pool of this kind of ichor is congealing, right? And that's where they get they skim it and they kind of treat it and they create it. And so that's the first layer. The second layer is something that we'll have to figure out. And then the third layer is
Profit.
Yeah. No, the third layer is like the spring itself. It's like this natural kind of underground sludge river. Or we can even treat it like oil realistically. You know,
I was
like-
picturing it as an oil,
Yeah.
like an opalescent shimmery thing.
I was thinking of not like opalescent, but certainly like a prismatic kind of like shifting color and stuff like that. So let's go ahead and think about the middle part then, right? Like if we're thinking about this as a 3-tiered dungeon.
Wouldn't that have to be where these mercenaries are doing their work?
Well, no, that's the first layer.
Oh, I see.
That's where the treatment and the mercenaries kind of hang out because there's no reason for them to go any further than that, right? And then the first layer is okay, so now let's think about this. What's at the heart of this shit? What's at the heart of the river? Because I imagine that it's not just like a goop river, but there's something else there. What can
New
we?
god.
Yes, Daniel, thank you. It is a new god heart that is a compilation or a conglomerate of all of the other gods that have been kind of cast aside.
Yes.
Is it sort of like the opposite of the god blob in a way?
Oh.
Or maybe this is the origin of the god blob, aka the apotheosis.
I was kind of picturing the cluster in like Steven Universe.
Yeah, I could see that as well. Like barely sentient, but also insanely powerful. I could see something like that for sure. Okay, yeah, let's do that. So now I'm picturing of like it's a stalactite top. That is essentially, that's where all of this kind of starts from. And it's essentially the cool version of like a roper, where it's like okay, this is where all of the essences have kind of mingled and dripped down, right? So there you go. We've got that idea and so that is where that is the god heart. The stalactite is the god heart because it absorbs essences in a really weird, fucked up kind of way. All right, cool. Now the middle part. Let's think about the middle part a little bit. What do we got there? Oh, got it. This is where the actual legit horrifying monsters live. We were talking about the idea that there's cultists or chemists who are basically at the front part skimming, just trying to make a living, like selling crystal meth, like Breaking Bad. And then meanwhile you go in further and there's horrifying monsters. That's where the heroes kind of come in. Heroes in big quotations, obviously, where it's like, hey, I need to go prove myself that I'm a hero. And so, okay, maybe the chemists are acting as guides. So like, oh yeah, we'll help you get to the monsters. And then meanwhile, like, because obviously no one's stupid enough to go and do that all the time. So they can mask themselves as guides and kind of like, hey, we'll help you get to these monsters. We know exactly where they are. And then while they're off doing hero shit, they're like skimming the pool and making drugs.
Yeah.
I could also see them periodically releasing some of the monsters just to kind of drum up mercenaries and people who would want to come in and like clear out stuff. They're like, all right, what if we let like 5 of them go? They'll, ravage a town and everything, but then we might get some adventurers who would come here and clear out the rest so that we can go a little bit deeper.
I love that.
I'm a little bit wary of that because that makes it seem as though the chemists are the keepers of these monsters. And I wanted to make it be like, this is it's like
a contained ecosystem of its own. Yeah,
exactly. And I'm imagining that those chemists are like a gazelle at a watering hole. They look down and they're drinking that water where their eyes are looking at like a fucking lion right next to them. But they're like, we're cool at the watering hole, guys. We're cool. And then meanwhile, those monsters, once they're out of there, they tear ass out of there. And it's like, all right, we're out of the way. Like, go ahead.
They might know how to draw them out, though, too.
I suppose so. Although, I can also imagine that they get rid of rivals by just dumping them. And maybe that's how they release monsters into the wild. Is that they'll just be like, all right, toss them in the goo. And then pull them out. And then throw them out of the cave system or whatever it is. And so now you've got a self-sustaining ecosystem in that regard as well. Yeah. And then, all right, so maybe that middle part in between is like the further to the god heart you get, the worse and the more powerful the monsters become. So it's kind of like a darkest dungeon situation where you can get, oh yeah, I can fight a couple cultists. Oh yeah, I can fight a couple of those weird mutant fish guys. Oh God, I'm in the darkest dungeon and shit's getting real. Okay, we gotta kick rocks. We gotta get out of here before my brain just melts.
I could also see some of the monsters just being created from accidents, like someone slips, falls in, and
oh, absolutely,
unsupervised.
100%.
Now I'm thinking of Fallout and like people falling into vats of forced evolutionary virus and turning into horrible monsters. And yeah.
See, I was thinking of RoboCop. Where they get dunked in the nuclear waste.
Oh, to take the Fallout spin of it, also there could be something like the Master, if you really want. Like that could be the intelligence behind
that's the god
heart.
Yeah, that's the god heart, 100%.
Yeah. And this is this like horrible amalgamation of all these different like god personalities. Yeah.
And is this a god of monsters, or is it? Because I feel like that's too easy. I feel like we want it to be like a god of pollution or a god of
or even like a
corruption.
God of like creation in a way.
Oh, that's actually really brilliant. Like, because normally we think of gods of creation as like the generally speaking the nice ones.
Yeah, like
but
the pure-hearted like.
Yeah, except for Zeus. But
yeah.
But I like that. I like that subversion a little bit better. Where this is the god of creation, but he's what he creates is just a little bit whatever.
Just don't look at him. Just pretend he's not
there
there.
is a god of creation in there as well.
Somewhere there.
Oh God, could you imagine like go ahead and stare into the eyes of creation and it's just like that's kind of scary. Okay.
We are unity.
I'm also getting Shodan vibes for some reason. System Shock? No one?
Oh, yeah.
Never,
No.
Okay, I was gonna say. I'm like, don't.
Running through my corridors.
Hacker. Yeah, thank you, Chris. Glad that someone here can relate to my Anyway, I think that's a good place to stop. I feel like that's a really fleshed out dungeon. I think that's a really fucking cool dungeon as well. Let's go ahead and move over. Do we want to go to the Bank of Death or do we want to go to the Empire of Embers?
Bank of Death.
Okay. Oh. We'll do Bank of Death. Now, what we had with the Bank of Death last time, I think that we already had a dungeon pretty much baked in, which was that entire city buried under the tar. I want to avoid that because I feel like we've basically done most of the work. Or do we want to be lazy and just kind of skip over that? What do you guys think?
Yeah, while I do find the Tar City super interesting, I also want to avoid it just because I don't want to have to think about all the tar and it getting into things.
Yeah, I mean, the tar enough is like such an awful, awful thing to think about. Like, imagine trying, like, I think all right, I guess we're doing the Tar City now. Thanks.
Damn it.
So
Perfect.
why don't we give us a little recap of how that tar got there?
Okay, so thank you, Daniel. So for the recap, the Bank of Death is a small but economically very powerful nation that worships, surprise, the god of death. There are now 6 of the remaining God Pact who their God Pacted ability is that they just don't die. And so they've used their immortality to become incredibly wealthy, influential, and essentially act as the invisible hand of the economic market. Now, what we've created here is because the God Pacted are essentially the nobility and the very powerful people behind the nation. There were originally 10 God Pacted, now there's only 6. And this was my idea to create a way to kind of explain where the rest of those God Pacted went. And at least for one of them, it meant that they went mad with power, tried to commit a coup essentially, and started the God Pacted War of the God of Death, which, let me tell you, did not work out well for them. Now, essentially, this God Pacted, because they're deathless, they have been banished to, which was once their city, has been buried under an entire ocean of tar. And that is where they are now living or unliving. We kind of left that up to imagination. And now they are essentially a crazy monster lich type thing. And the idea of a city just half sunken or mostly sunken in tar, the reason I like that so much is because that in and of itself is a hazard that is unique. And my God, can you imagine trying to navigate tar? It's, as Chris said in that episode, it's a mixture between underground and underwater and lava. And it's the worst. Like, you're probably just getting to a point where inside the stone of the city itself is going to be nightmarish. And it's probably going to be hot and awful. And that's why I want to go with it. So we're doing this now. Go ahead.
When I was listening to that episode, I kept thinking of the Boston molasses flood.
Oh,
yes.
Which is like horrific, thinking about drowning in a wave of 30-mile-an-hour moving molasses.
Yeah.
I was going to say, at least it smelled nice.
As you're getting scalded and drowned to
Well,
death
I mean,
at the same
tar
time.
does not smell nice.
No,
You get the same
yeah,
effect.
Yeah.
A lot of people make a joke about that, like, oh, how could you do that? But it's like, no, that's actually horrifying.
Yeah.
And I thought people burned to death before they drowned. Or maybe it was...
I don't know.
As they drowned.
Yeah. Also, can you imagine just, like, let's say you just get a foot that's just, like, soaked in that. Just the feeling of that alone. I had a friend of mine who was a baker, and she had her arm accidentally dipped into hot caramel.
Oh, no.
And the terrible thing about caramel... you can't wash it off.
Yep.
So she had to sit there writhing in agony as the caramel hardened around her skin. Yeah. Oh, yeah, because otherwise her skin would have sloughed off
Yeah.
with it.
Jesus.
Yeah.
Would the molasses be hot?
Yes.
It was hot.
It was
Oh,
hot.
it was hot. Okay.
Yeah.
I was just
That's
realizing.
why
like,
I think that's why the vat exploded. Is it
Yes.
like overheated,
well, I also know
overpressurized?
part of it was the fact that the vat was just way too big. Like, the person did not follow construction properly and was just like, what if I just put all of it in one big vat? Because we didn't have standards back. Well,
All right. Well, so let's go ahead and deep dive a little bit more into the city under the tar. Let's talk about the God Pacted themselves. Like, how do we want them to be what is essentially a lich? Or do we want them to be like manipulating the city as though it were nothing more than an animate golem. So the entire city is like a construct for them to manipulate, which would make that kind of fun and interesting. Kind of like the way that Dracula manipulates the castle in Castlevania, for example. Something like that, where the castle, where the entire city itself is a big part of the adventure. And it like, that's kind of the idea that I want to run with, is that it's essentially the creature itself is now the entirety of the city. And it's acting as though like its body, its actual body is more or less the brain or the heart. And so in order to kill the city, you have to kill this monster within.
Is the city totally under tar, or is like it just kind of covered in tar?
I want to say yes to both. Like I imagine that there are some buildings completely submerged, and there are other buildings that are like, maybe you can see the peaks of certain buildings kind of poking out from the top.
Okay. I mean, I like the idea of these God-pacted having maybe been transformed into the tar. So the tar is a living tar now, really, and that's how the city itself is alive. You know, like it's fused with the city's skeleton, and so now the tar, they can manipulate the city because they are the tar. I
like that idea a lot. I can definitely fuck with that. So it's a matter of they've leaked their consciousness out into the tar itself. Yeah. It's not that the tar is alive, but their essence is now manipulating it as such.
Yeah.
So the city are the bones of this massive creature, and the tar is like a weird kind of fucked up musculature system.
I feel weird saying this because I originally prepared that we were going to be doing a dungeon for the land of primordial flesh. And I had thought of the dungeon being the Vorhole, but I'm glad that we got back to some elements that I could take from that.
That could have been a sex dungeon.
Yes.
There's still time.
Yeah. We've got plenty of time for sex dungeons, trust me.
Just open the tar. Suddenly, whoa!
Oh, no.
That's the real reason no one has gone in. Yeah. Oh, that actually kind of gives me a point. Why would people come and visit this city? Why would they try and, like go into the city of Tar itself? I imagine there's the obvious, like there's treasure in Tar.
It's got to be money related.
Yeah, I
mean, the Bank of Death.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So can we now take it? And so this God Pacted was more powerful than his brethren, at least for a while. And thus he was a better collector. And so he has rare things that just don't exist anywhere else.
Yep.
Vintage bottles of wine, rare artworks. And so basically you're like getting ready, like, okay, we're getting ready to run. We're just going to scamper in there, grab as much as we can before people recognize, and then scamper right on out.
People don't know that he protected his city by becoming it.
Yeah.
Ooh,
that's
nice.
great. Yeah. It's like it's like a dragon who just decided to become the cave that holds his coins in.
I feel like the overarching theme is kind of like lost glory. Because it was someone who was could challenge multiple of his brethren God Pacted, but then kind of got smashed and brought low. Even if he is part of the city now, it's hearkening back to a better time. Because I would say that since he was one of the more powerful ones, and going how you were saying that it had things the others did not, I'm going to say that there are certain parts of the city that are protected. I can't finger quotes protected. Finger quotes protected.
I like that idea a lot, actually. I like the idea that the theme is kind of surrounded like fallen glory or a fall from grace, because you're essentially looking at something that, in their prime, they were essentially a god, and then they were brought low. And so what have they done since then? Like, not only were they brought low in terms of prestige, but also physically, like their body is not physically powerful enough to exist very much. And thus, like, now they're a living ooze, essentially a living tar within this thing.
It could also be like pride. Like that's what got them to that point of they got so powerful, and then we're like, kind of like the, what are you going to do? Stab me thing? Like, what are you going to do? Bury my city in like a bunch of tar? And then that actually happened. And they're like, ah, shit.
Local man buried in tar.
Florida.
All right, yeah, I'm fucking down with this. I feel like that's pretty much it. Like that's pretty much a good enough area to stop, right?
Yeah, like I don't think it needs any like monsters of its own because it itself
It
is like
itself
the
is a
danger.
monster.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Although, hold on.
The danger zone, if you will.
Oh no, that's not what I thought.
What?
With talking about Breaking Bad earlier, I thought it just like I am the danger.
Oh yeah.
That works too.
Both of them work.
Yeah.
Both of them work, frankly. Now, hold on, though. Hold on. Because you brought up monsters, and we have to add a little bit of monsterdom in there. Like, we have to add, like, some kind of weird parasite. You know, like, there's the lamprey on top, on the underside of the shark, right? So what are the monsters that are inhabiting this place that are essentially... Maybe for ecological reasons, they are either the antibodies that are acting for this giant thing, or they're kind of keeping the insides clean in some cases.
This is making me think of like the mummy and the scarabs in there, like these like swarms of little like tiny creatures that on their own wouldn't be so bad, but when they act as a swarm, it's this like horrifying wave.
I'm totally down with that. I love the mummy, as we all know.
Yeah, same.
And thank you. And shout out Brendan Fraser. One day we'll have him on the podcast. One day.
Well, instead of insects, maybe you can have like small creatures that wouldn't be expected to be a swarm.
I like that idea.
Yeah.
I'm just not sure what those creatures would be.
And something that serves the purpose as essentially cleaners, right?
Yeah.
Something that...
We brought them up before, but this would be the most terrible use of them. But the sprig rats,
Yes.
like,
Oh, yeah.
if they were to live in the tar, assuming that they're
yeah.
even worse in the city, I figure them either eating away the tar, it
love it.
hardening. There's now
no.
like a catacomb
That's
of
how you
tubes.
can get through the tar.
Yeah,
They
yeah.
get through it.
And then you can literally like find yourself into a room that's just been hollowed out by these things that have been eating the tar for the last like
And some of them are
1,000
huge.
years. Yes.
Yeah, okay. That's a great idea.
Yeah.
Excellent idea, you guys.
And they look super gross.
Yeah.
I love them.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. All right, that's perfect. Now, for the last dungeon, because we kind of don't have a basis for it at all, we're going to be doing the Empire of Embers. And so what we're going to be doing, as you've probably heard in some of our previous interviews, we're going to be doing a world-building jam session using the same tables that we normally use. Obviously, we already have a genre because we're doing fantasy, and we already have a subject, which is a dungeon. So we're basically just going to be rolling for theme and adding a twist once we've kind of created enough of a dungeon. So let's go ahead and bust out the dice.
Whatever we roll, I'm going to turn into a sex dungeon.
I mean,
You act as though I don't. All right, so our theme today, Triumph, which I think is actually perfect because Empire of Embers. All right, so for those of you who don't know, the Empire of Embers is well, it started out as a kind of nice place, and then all sorts of political shenanigans happened. If you want to know more, go back and listen to the episode. But overall, it is now a place that is full of paranoia. So this is the second largest empire, or second largest expansive nation state within the continent that we have. And they, for generations, have acted as a bulwark against the caliphate of feast and famine. They've been rivals for a really long time, and recently political machinations have really turned everything upside down. Were fiercely individualist for a while, but now they're kind of becoming more paranoid, and that is a growing theme. But to mix it with Triumph, and to kind of go against type from what we've done with the previous ones, that they're all kind of like in the wilds a little bit, let's make this dungeon an urban dungeon. And because we're doing Triumph, I want it to be the Emperor's Garden itself is going to be a dungeon.
In it or under it?
Both.
Okay.
Because again, if we want to do layers of dungeon, right? The top layer is probably one of the most dangerous ones or actually, how do we want to build it? Do we want to make it so the garden itself is the end point, or do
Have
we
it go up?
Yeah. Okay, that's a really good idea. So we start in the sewers, kind of go up in the middle where the palace is, and then it ends in the dungeon at the top.
Oh, I mean like totally flip it upside down. So start in the garden that's on the ground floor and have it go all the way up into a building.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Where the
Like
dungeon is like the top of some kind of parapet sort of thing.
Like a terrace?
Yeah, like it keeps going upwards.
Okay, yeah, we can, or like a ziggurat of some kind.
Like,
Yeah.
The garden is it separate from that place where they sacrifice? Is the garden separate from the place where they sacrifice stuff?
Yes.
They're separate.
Yes.
Used to.
Yes.
Yes.
Air quotes.
Well, remember, it wasn't a sacrifice. They just turned them into relics.
Oh, okay.
So it's totally cool, you guys. It's fine that you're just kind of murdering god hearts and transferring them into enslaved items. It's totally fine. Anyway.
I'm just thinking of the ways to throw for people to fall out of a dungeon and die, because that's always fun.
Yes.
That doesn't happen.
All right. So let's start at the garden. And I want it to be a large botanical garden that is probably full of wild animals and exotic wild animals at that. Let's go ahead and start there.
I mean, I remember the edges of the garden, there was a place for people to have like political conversations. So maybe it's the closer they get to the structure part that goes up that it's scary.
Yes. So, all right. So now the garden is just going to be the basic level. And then we're going to have this ziggurat that represents triumph. It is literally a phallus piercing the sky, right? That represents the might of the emperor.
Yeah.
All right.
He's also
Hold
raising
on.
his fist upward.
So he's fisting the sky. Got
I
it.
just want to emphasize.
Okay. Actually, I had an idea just now, and I think it's kind of dumb, but every time I say this, I've gone with it. Picture the Tower of Sauron, right? And there's just a giant flaming eyeball at the top. I want something like that because what else represents victory over your enemies? Like a giant brazier at the top of a giant tower. And that's actually what I kind of think. So there's the garden, and then there's a brazier that is like representative of the ever burning life that is the emperor and his grasp.
Make the brazier an actual fist or hand.
Yes, actually, that's what I was thinking, is that it's a grasping hand, and there's just a flame coming out of it constantly.
Yes.
Like, that is the brazier itself,
It's his hand. Yep.
Yes.
I'm
It's
thinking about like the aftermath of like having an ever burning flame, this huge flame above an area, like the ash that would fall down,
Yep.
the stuff that
And
would like
it falls on the garden.
Yeah.
Like the ash.
yeah.
Oh my God, the Ash Garden of the Emperor.
Yeah.
That's a fucking dope ass metal album name if I've ever fucking heard of it. Fuck yes. Excellent. Okay.
Macedon or Dragon Force. As far as who would write.
Oh,
Sorry.
I'm thinking black metal. I'm not even thinking I'm not even thinking like
I was going for power metal.
no, I was thinking black metal,
I was thinking black metal for
death
sure.
metal.
Wow.
What if up on the tops there where that fist is, there's like scaly...
Can we call it a hand and not a fist?
with the burning fist that's fisting the world.
God damn it.
Like, is there like birds or flying things that linger up there?
I was thinking that too, and like what would they look like after being exposed to this like ever burning torch? Ooh, or like insects because they're attracted to the flame.
Oh, I like that more. Yeah, I like the idea of like not only is it ash, but it's like burning corpses.
Deadly moths.
Deadly moths?
Because they're attracted to flame.
Nothing's more deadly than moths.
See, that's kind of dumb, but I kind of want to run with it. Like, I kind of want to make it like there are like death's head moths or something like that.
Yeah.
That's what I like.
Yeah, because we can turn your shit into gold,
They could
Daniel.
be
Don't
woolly.
worry.
You know, like they feed off of aphids. Which are in the neighboring
God
garden.
damn it,
Full
Daniel.
circle.
Yeah.
Got there.
Yeah.
Got there.
Just a reminder that Worldbuild with us does not condone any use of aphids in any setting whatsoever,
Especially milkable ones.
especially milkable ones.
Gross.
They're delicious, delicious milk.
Okay, so why again are people trying to get to the top of this tower?
Well, that's a good question.
That's an excellent question.
I believe that it should be some sort of public like opinion thing where it was just like, yes, if you wish to have an audience with the emperor, you merely have to get to the top of the tower.
That's not a bad idea.
Wow.
That's actually kind of a fun idea. It's like, hey, if you want your
Grievances heard by the emperor, just get to the top of the tower. You always have a choice to voice your grievances to the emperor. I don't see why people are complaining.
It's democracy. I love democracy.
Papa Palps.
Okay, hold on, because that's actually kind of an interesting idea, right? Because maybe it's not a matter of, like, if you want maybe it's a grievance thing as well, but maybe there's also a way that if you want into the army, or if you want to be a general in the army, in a lot of ways, because it's so militaristic, this is part of it. It is a challenge. It's like the Olympic torch ceremony where you have to take a part of the emperor's power and show, or if you want to get real weeby about it, it's kind of like in JoJo where you have to keep. Yeah, Chris knows what I'm talking about. Yeah, it's in JoJo where you have to flick the lighter and keep the lighter going for the entire 24 hours. That's exactly what it is. Okay.
If only the
it's an
bracer was in the
initiation
bottom,
process.
'cause they need to keep the flame up all the way up, but I like the idea of putting the thing into the fire at the end, to get it lit.
What do you mean?
Like if there's an actual torch that has to be lit so you can see that you've gotten up there or something.
So it's not just about getting up, it's about getting down as well.
And you can't take the zip line.
Yeah.
Zip line's only for the emperor.
Well, I mean, imagine falling off, like that flame might go out.
Yeah.
So it's not just a matter of
To carry his divine flame back to him.
yes, that's actually really fucking good. So like the further you go out, like, so it's actual garden. And then once you get into the deeper part of the woods, just full of horrible animals. And then it's the Tower of Doom. And then you actually have to get there. And I don't know where the moths come in, guys, but we didn't forget about that. Don't worry.
Well, they hunt you the whole goddamn time. After you get out, they're like drawn to your flame now.
Wait a minute. No.
Fuckers.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Hold on.
Yeah.
Can we please pay an homage? That's actually really good, by the way. I don't want to turn that away. But let's turn the moths from regular ass moths into slake moths.
Yep. I was just
from
thinking
Perdido
that.
Street Station because my God, like shout outs to China Meeville. Like, come on.
Those things are horrifying.
They are horrifying.
Yeah.
Holy shit, are they horrifying? Daniel, have you read Perdido Street
I
Station?
have read part of Perdido Street
You should
Station.
read all of
son
it.
of
I
a
read up to
bitch.
the part where the bird guy is ruminating on, I think it's flying.
Oh.
So, like,
not about
That's
taking
like
could be
25
like-
pages
others?
in.
It's a little bit of it. It's not too far in.
That's every page she's on.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
To be
Yeah.
honest, I'm not a super huge fan of it.
Oh.
But,
You got 25 pages in. Fuck you.
And, like,
you have to read that
Controversial
much to know whether you like it or not.
Trust me, it like gets like
It gets
intense.
way better.
It gets fucking
It's
dark.
a little floral for me.
So are
Ooh.
these...
Daniel, I fucking hate your terrible taste sometimes. God damn
He's,
it.
he's good, but it's too floral for me.
All right. So we've got our homage to China Meeville. We've got our homage to New Chromosome. Now, obviously, we have to throw in a twist. So let's fuck ourselves and roll some dice. Reverse the roles of the heroes and villains. Okay. I feel like we can fuck with this one now. I feel like this is a good one to kind of get into. So who are the heroes in this story? Are they the ones who are seeking to get the flame, or is it the Emperor?
We would probably think of the people going up the thing as the heroes, traditionally.
Yeah.
All right, so now let's go ahead and make them the villains. How are they the villains now?
They're trying to assassinate the emperor, but...
No, because that's not necessarily villainous. Let's go ahead and make it so whatever the trials that they have transforms them into a villain on the way there. It's not just a matter of reverse the roles. It's this process reverses the role for you. So it makes you commit worse and worse atrocities. And it asks you, how badly do you want to be part of the Empire? And thus it turns a hero into a villain through complicity, through
Respective authority.
through bending the knee. Absolutely. I mean, how does fascism rise, right? This is how fascism rises. It is the tower that transforms you.
Is this the same emperor who had the who was able to bring back people multiple times through
Yes.
the secret cult?
Yes, it is.
I wonder if there's a way to tie that together too, in that maybe this is the trial of making them.
I imagine that what happens is at the end of this trial, you're asked by the Emperor to immolate yourself in his holy flame.
There we go. That's
Nice.
That's
Yeah.
I like
Nice.
that.
And then
I
he
like
brings you back. It's like a trust fall.
Yeah,
Exactly.
it's like
You brought back. He says now
Exactly.
put it on yourself.
Exactly.
it's like the
Exactly.
ultimate show of like submission. Like okay, I'll like give up my life for you if that's really what you want.
Yeah.
So we did turn this
And then
into
he
a sex
brings you back.
dungeon.
We did it.
Yeah, there we go.
Congrats.
Good work.
Yeah, but unlike sex dungeons, the submissives don't actually have all the power.
Yeah, no.
Unfortunately, in this case, yeah. All right. Honestly, I think that's gonna do it. Like, I feel like that's a really strong way to do that dungeon. Like, fuck yeah, great job, everyone, especially me. No. Great job, everyone. Really, that was a real great team effort. Excellent reference to the Mummy. Thank you, Courtney.
Yep.
And yeah, I think that'll wrap it up for this episode. Courtney, thank you so much for joining us on the episode, and thank you so much for being able to share your very cool environmental-based dungeon with us. I think that it's going to join or bring a lot to the world as is.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. This was really fun.
All right, and again, thank you, Courtney. Do you have like a website or a Twitter or something like that you want us to plug?
Do you tweet?
I am on the Twitter. It's C Staples is my
Okay.
is my
That's pretty fun.
Is that where you share your staple art?
I will share a link to her Twitter and any kind of art that she wants to put up. Courtney is an artist, and outside of awesome logos, she does actually have really cool art that you should go take a look at and hire her for at some point.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah. And that's this episode. I mean, I got nothing else. So remember that, have a great week, and that we love you very much, and we'll see you next time.